I'm Jill Beck, founder and CEO of Go Long. I focus on burnout for women over 40. And I'm really pleased to have with me special guest, Miya Nazzaro. She is the managing partner and founder of Nazzaro PLLC. And she is an expert in many things. And she's going to be talking to us about legal journeys for women 40 plus. And also her expertise definitely is in relation to if you are starting a business and even if you're growing a business and scaling a business. She's been there, she's done that. She's got the t-shirt and she's going to be here to answer your questions. And so Miya, I'd love to turn it over to you to talk about maybe your journey and how you got here, and then we can go from there.
Sure. And you might hear my kids in the background because, that's part of being an entrepreneur sometimes is you just roll with it. So I have given them some tasks. We'll see how they do. I think the most important part of my journey has been that I have learned to roll with the punches. And I have started many ventures solo and with others, learned along the way. Some of them, quote unquote, failed. But during those failures, I definitely learned a lot and applied it to the next ventures. And all of that kind of culminates into that experience and that wisdom that comes with age. And it's all of those experiences together. And for me personally, it's the integration of all of my roles in life of being a daughter, a sister, a mother, formerly a wife, really understanding how to communicate, different ways to communicate, how to draw boundaries, how to set expectations, how to be flexible, all of those things which aren't necessarily focused on law or business, but those are the things that make a difference in how I run a business now, how I work with people, and for me have been the most important traits in running a business because business is about relationships. It's about communication.
Awesome. I have a couple questions that we can kick things off with. And then if people have questions and they want to raise their hand, which is at the bottom of everyone's screen, raise your hand and we'll go in order and we'll just keep going through questions. And there may be some topics that Miya will kind of expand upon, because she may think it may make sense based on the question that may not have been included in the scope of the question. Okay. So Miya, definitely have a couple of friends who they are single and they are only children. And so the thing is that they're trying to think about estate planning for themselves and how that works. Because like for me, I have nieces and nephews, even though my husband and I don't have kids. But in this person's case, they don't have nieces and nephews. So maybe you could talk a little bit about how you advise clients in that kind of a situation.
So first, we don't tell you what to do with your assets. Our job is to really make sure that we're documenting what you want and help you walk through the process of thinking it through. Okay. Many people, if they still have parents or even extended family that they want to care for, then oftentimes their wills or trust will be directed towards those individuals. If you really are single without any surviving immediate family or essentially chosen family, then really taking a look at what your priorities and values are in life. And that might be friendships. Many of us have very deep and dear friendships that we value and have become that chosen family. And that somebody could use that assistance. And oftentimes we see funds directed towards those individuals. Other times we will work with people who have a particular passion, whether it's the environment or literacy or world events. And it will work with them to direct their assets towards those passions. Now, I always caution people to be careful when you're directing it towards an organization, because that organization may not be around when you do die. And so we do have caveats in there. So it might be directed towards a particular organization initially, but if that organization ceases to exist or their mission changes, that the funds would then be directed to an organization such as, and giving somebody the power to make that choice, because you don't know what's going to happen in the future.
That's helpful. And yeah, I know you don't like tell people, but I guess it was just more of the, oh shit, what do I do? When I'm in this situation, what kind of advice? But I think that that's pretty sound advice.
I mean, and there are instances where, and I haven't had a client do this, but if child hunger is important, you can always donate to a local school's lunch program, the breakfast and lunch program. There are so many options out there, whether you do it while you're alive or you're going to make a bequest upon your death. There's so many ways that you can help others. There's so many causes out there, and many of us have at least one or more passions.
Yeah. So what do you think are the things when people come to you maybe after the fact or something like that? Where do you think the things that you wish that people knew before they made certain decisions, or that they took the time to think about, right? Because we're all experts on this call in our different fields, and we're all like, oh, I wish before you made a decision, you might have thought about this. So I have to think that there are things that you see that you would want to educate people on thinking through in general when they're going through a process like this.
Yeah. So first, get an estate plan in place. I'm going to lay that out. And actually, I don't care if you get a will. That's money. What I really care about is how you are treated while you're living. Because if you are unable to make your own medical decisions, I want you to live the way that you want. I don't want you to be on life support if that's not what you want. I don't want you to have extraordinary measures if that's not what you want. And if it is what you want, I want you to be able to have that. I want you to be able to make those decisions. I want you to be able to pay your mortgage or your rent or your car payments and credit card payments while you're in the hospital recovering from a major illness and unable to do those things on your own. I want you to have those documents in place. So there's power of attorneys for your finances, there's powers of attorney for your medical decisions, and then there's your advanced medical directive. And I want you to be in control of your life while you're living. I mean, a will is important. What you do with your assets is important. I'm not going to pretend it's not, but how we exist is, to me, the most important part. And to make sure that we're existing the way that we desire. Now, I think one of the most frequent mistakes in these documents for a power of attorney is that when it's signed, people decide, well, I just want it upon my incapacitation, when I'm unable to make a decision. That is a horrible idea. You want it to start the moment you sign it, and you want to trust the other person to not mess with your funds, to not make decisions or request your medical information unless they really need it, right? If you can't trust that person, then they shouldn't be your power of attorney. But if you have it springing from the time of incapacitation, then that person's going to need to get proof that you're incapacitated. You may not have the time it takes to go get the proof. You can't even talk to the doctors to figure out what evidence there is that they could provide you because of HIPAA laws. And so it really starts to tie your hands. And so having the ability to release information is so important. And being able to have that start from the moment you sign so that you know that you're okay. If somebody needs to make a decision, then you want them to be able to make that decision and not have to jump through hoops. Now, people ask me, but I might change my mind. Well, that's fine. It's not written in stone. It's a piece of paper. You can revoke it. You can create a new one that supersedes that one. So it's not a forever document if you don't want it to be, but definitely protect yourself. And I think that's really important regardless of your marital status. Making sure that the person you're choosing to make the choices can follow what's right for you. And I say this because sometimes the people we love the most and are the closest to are not the best people to either manage our money, pay the bills, or maybe it's not the right person to make medical decisions. They don't do well in hospitals, blood makes them queasy, the words are too big, they get confused, they get overwhelmed. So you might have a different person for each of those power of attorney positions. So that's really where I stand on my soapbox. And then as far as wills and trust go, putting money and assets into a revocable trust is great to avoid some of the hassle of probate, but you know, at least have something in place. It doesn't have to be a trust, it can be a will. Have something. It helps so that it's easier for your heirs. But if you have to go without something, then go without that. Everything will be distributed according to law. There's statutes in place that govern it. It's a little bit of a hassle, but you're dead. It's kind of blunt, but again, my focus is on my clients and making sure that they're living the life they want to live, the way they want to live it in the most dire circumstances. I hope that answers
Right.
your question.
Yeah, yeah. So, we know that women tend to outlive men, right? So is there
Mhm.
anything else that people need to be thinking about in addition to what you talked about, like different considerations?
Yeah, know your Social Security benefits. And I know it's not enough to live off of. I get that. But it is supplemental income. And if you have been married previously, and you were married for 10 years or more, and your former spouse is eligible for benefits, then you're eligible on their record. They don't even have to know that you're drawing on their record. If you are married, then you're able to draw on your spouse's record, depending on, who has more benefits. There's a lot of calculations in place for this, but know what you're entitled to. Know when you should start drawing those benefits. That makes a big difference if you draw at 63 versus at 70. So planning ahead, that financial planning is really important, but understanding the rules that are in place. And everybody on this call, I'm assuming, is over 40. So we will have Social Security. Is it going to change? Maybe, probably, but it'll still be there. And we've all contributed to it. I think it's really important, especially if you are self-employed, that you understand how you're paying yourself, how that is going to matter in your Social Security calculations. Now, it may be better to just go ahead and reduce your income currently and invest the money, and you have a strategy, and that's going to be better for you than contributing to Social Security and reaching your max contribution. It's fine. Work that out with your financial advisor, but understand the process, because Social Security is in place until we die. But we can run out of our savings. And so I think for me, that's really important. And that's not something that I thought about when I was in my 20s. I mean, that was a lifetime in the future, right? But as I get older, I'm like, well, maybe that would still be nice to have that supplemental income. And I see that with some of our clients where it's not going to be what supports them, but it is going to help them to pay for some of their expenses. And it's something that we just need to keep in mind. And it does matter how we plan, how we structure our businesses, how we pay ourselves. If you have a business, if you're able to get health insurance through your business through a group plan until you qualify for what is it, Medicare, making sure you understand how you're going to get to that quote unquote finish line and stay healthy. Take care of yourself. I think that that's really important, and we can use our business structures to do that.
Okay, so that's a really good segue. So there's people who may be like independent contractors, and then there are people who are starting their own businesses, right? And so maybe we could talk a little bit about, all right, I have a business idea. How do what now what?
So even if you're an independent contractor, you're a business.
Right.
You have your own income, you're responsible for your own profit and loss. Everybody should have a retirement account set up. You can contribute to it later. You have to follow all the accounting rules, but you can set it up now and contribute to it by October. You can work with your accountant on all of that, but really understanding the difference and what is necessary for you. And again, this is an accounting question with your CPA of a 401k, which you can get an individual 401k if it's just you, or you and spouse, or if you want to get the SEP account, and which one makes sense for your business, for your cash flow. And then think about how your business is going to work for you. What is it you want to do, grow? What is that vision? Do you want a lifestyle business? Do you want to be able to sell it, even if it's a nominal amount, to somebody else in the future? For me personally, I was never interested in starting a business that would just pay the bills and then when I'm done, just close it down. And I've done those. And there is value to that. But there's a lot more value in building something that you can hand off to somebody else and get paid for, right? And so think about what systems you're going to put in place. It's always important having contracts in place so you have value to your business, because that's part of your nest egg. You're creating value in what you're doing.
Let's talk about setting up contracts, whether it's with, like, say, customer contracts, partnership contracts. These are all things of, you're doing business, and so you're developing these relationships. So maybe you could talk a little bit about what goes into thinking about a customer contract in terms of protecting yourself, but not going overboard to the point of like no one can understand the legalese there. And then the same thing maybe with partnership contracts.
So I think it depends on who your audience is. If you are going to have a contract that people who walk in off the street need to sign, that's probably going to read a little bit differently than a contract with another business and the size of the business. And so knowing your audience is important. Now, our default is that we write for businesses. We write in a formal legal way because that is the most vetted language. So if you get into a dispute, that's the language that's been litigated. That's the language that's been standing up. Everybody knows how to interpret it. The more casual writing can be more difficult. We do that as needed, but we try to really understand the why behind it. We also pare down contracts because sometimes the risks are relatively nominal. And so the point of having all those clauses becomes reduced. And the important thing is to get the contract signed, right? I mean, it doesn't matter if you have no revenue, then why bother, right? So the goal is to bring revenue in. And if the contract's going to scare people away, then you have to evaluate, what do I need? What are my biggest concerns? What are my biggest risk factors? How do I want to present that information? And so really understanding, again, who your audience is incredibly important. And then understanding yourself and your own anxieties, your own concerns, what your actual risk is versus your perceived risk. Most of us perceive a higher risk level than actually exists. And I'm also going to put out there, everybody should have insurance when they're running a business in general. I mean, some businesses are less risky than others, but business insurance can help you to reduce your risk as well. The agreements, though, themselves, there's a reason people hire attorneys. We've seen agreements come off of LegalZoom and some of the other companies, and they're made to be really general. They're not made for your specific business. So we focus on things like payment schedule. We focus on the logistics of it to make sure that everybody's on the same page for how this is going to happen down to those details. And that's really important because that's where the communication breaks down. we do not anticipate that any of our clients are going to go to arbitration or to court. It's expensive. So the goal is to figure out how to create a good and healthy relationship, and how are you going to end that relationship when it's no longer fruitful. So we have a process for termination. We have a process to giving notice. And for many of our clients, we ask them, well, what's your next best alternative if you need to replace this contract? Not from a client perspective, but especially from like a vendor perspective or a partner perspective. How long would it take you to onboard somebody else? And so having that in the back of our minds, we're able to restructure that notice provision. We're able to restructure the termination clauses so that the contract works for you.
That makes a lot of sense. I've started Go Long recently, and I want the business to go long. No pun intended, but well, actually pun intended. So the thing is that what is it that you would advise? And I know that there's at least two people on here who are in a similar position to me, right? And obviously there's specific legal advice, but in terms of thinking about how you structure your business so it can grow and can scale, what are some of the things that you work with clients to think about? I assume you have a rubric or a checklist that you kind of work through.
So I'm going to assume that you're not a sole proprietor. I'm going to assume you're a formed entity like an LLC, which is the most common. Have your governance documents, have something in place that sets out how your company is going to be run. I think that that's just an important baseline. It's not always necessary if you're a sole member. So most states say that if you're a sole member, you don't need to have it in writing, but it is a good practice. I think the most fundamental part, if you're trying to build a business, is to get a good trademark. So you could trademark Go Long, you could trademark your logo, and that's where you start to build value, because now you have definitive intellectual property. Now your goal is to start branding all of your work. And again, we go back to valuation. And so when you've built out Go Long, you have protections in place for that brand. So if I wanted to buy Go Long, then it's worth something. You have Google reviews, you have a name in the marketplace, you have already been recognized as a speaker, you have intellectual property and podcasts, and they're being watched and it's generating leads. And so you have clients coming in from that and you're tracking that. And this is not a legal part, but track your metrics, right? Create metric systems that you're going to track for indicators to determine how productive your marketing and sales efforts are, your customer retention. Identify the value of the systems you have in place. And oftentimes those systems are based on contracts. But at the beginning, I believe that trademarks are important. It takes about a year to go through the system. I also believe that it's important to have good contracts in place with potential partners so that you can do business together and you understand what that relationship looks like. And I also think it's important to have good client engagement letters or contracts in place so you have a good and healthy client or customer relationship, because the goal is to have a business model that you can grow and scale and that is sturdy at the end of the day, right? You don't want something that's going to collapse like a house of cards, and you want something that's creating value. And when somebody goes in to determine what you're worth, they're looking at your revenue and then they're looking at that goodwill that's part of it. And those indicators from your metrics, those are key. Those show what your strengths are. And I think that that's really helpful, whether you're trying to be bought out, whether you're trying to get a loan, trying to bring in an investor, have those numbers in place.
That's really great feedback on the metrics, because I hadn't thought of it like that in terms of linking the contracts to the metrics. Maybe some others had, but I hadn't. Jillian has a question. Go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you so much, Jill, and thank you so much for hosting this. So, Miya, I thank you for being here. I have started my business a little over a year ago, and I think I put a lot of the foundational pieces in place. I do HR consulting with a focus on employee well-being. And I have various well-being challenges that, like, for instance, I just sent one off to a client. When can you use the copyright symbol? When can you not? I wasn't sure if that was like something you had to go through any type of legal approval to be using. So like I create these own wellness documents, my brain trust. And so I wanted to make sure I stuck the copyright on there. And I wasn't sure if that was.
So you don't need to stick it on for it to be protected. Anything you create that's an original idea is yours. That's common law.
Okay.
And you can use the little C with the circle. But even if you don't do it, it's still your original thought. Now I'm going to put out there, AI generated content is not original thought. AI generated images is not an original creation. Okay. Those things are not protectable.
Right.
And if you're pulling something off of like Canva or Adobe Photoshop that's stock, those things you cannot copyright as something that you've created, right?
Yeah. No, this is something I did.
But if it's from up here and you're pushing it out, that is original work of art. Now, the common law protections are pretty minimal, but I can't plagiarize. I can't plagiarize. I can't take your stuff. But if you want to actually receive damage payments, then you should be registering it with the Copyright Office at the federal government level. But why? Why are you going to do? Are you going to go after people?
No.
If the content's going to keep changing, it makes sense if you made a book.
Make people think twice. Like, don't. This is.
But nobody does.
I know.
But nobody does. So focus on, expend your efforts where it's going to matter. So what I tell my clients is mark it up. Tell people, distribute it, please. It's marketing. Distribute it. And you're going to put your name all over it. And you're going to put your contact information on it and your logo. Please feel free to circulate. Give them permission.
Okay. Got it.
I mean, at the end of the day, people will still rip you off anyway. They're still going to take your ideas and they're going to repackage it, and they're able to do that. That's the free flow of ideas, right? But you can choose how you want to leverage what you're putting out of your cocoon, right?
Got it.
So instead of thinking about it as, I want to protect this is my intellectual property, think about it as, wow, this is my marketing opportunity. I want to encourage them to distribute it. Like, I'm going to tell them, please feel free to distribute this to your HR counterparts at your other companies and let them know if I can help.
That's a great way to reframe. Thank you. I appreciate that.
So don't expend your energy going down avenues that you're not going to pursue.
Thank you.
All right, go ahead, Julie.
Hi, Maya, Jill, thank you for putting this together. This is great. Maya, I am curious about, I have several potential ideas for businesses, and what I'm really interested in is how do I go about doing market research to see if there is actually a need for some of the ideas that I have?
I think it depends on the type of idea you have. I mean, there's a lot of books and articles written about different ways to do market research, and you can put out a sample even, kind of depending on what you're trying to do, and see how people respond. Do people sign up? Are people interested in being pre-ordering? Are people interested in receiving a newsletter about X, right? Like, I mean, that provides you with at least an initial set of data.
Got it.
I think one of the things that we get so concerned about is like, oh, it's my idea and I want to protect it and I don't want anybody to steal it. Yeah, people might steal it. Absolutely. But they're far and few between. It's a lot of work. And it's not the idea that makes you successful. It's the execution of the idea.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Julie, to me, there's lots of people who have ideas, but Mia is right. It's all about how, if you're going to be the one to execute, and it's going to be, to Jillian's point, her intellectual property, right? And what comes out of her brain and the experiences that she has as an HR professional. your ideas are going to be the product of your experiences and your ability to get shit done. I mean, from an entrepreneur perspective and as someone who's done a lot of market research, lots of people can do research and then they don't do anything about it. And I'd be happy to share my
money. It
with
takes
you.
time.
Yeah.
It takes energy. It takes failing over and over again and
Yes.
seeing failure as moving towards success. And most people don't have that attitude, perspective on life, so they give up.
I think that in terms of other things to think about, you know, you talked about like your systems. Now, what if you're dealing with a business where it's more B2C, right? Like, you know, you're talking about like there's the B2B businesses here. And then there's like B2C, you know, so like for me, I'm dealing with individuals who are looking to get healthy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you know what, so it's a form of counseling, it's a form of coaching, right? How do you sit there and balance approachability? I mean, is your answer any different in terms of balancing approachability with getting the right language in place?
I'm going to put it this way. There are basics that you want to have covered, right?
Right.
How you get paid,
Yep.
when you get paid,
Yep.
some liability questions, right?
Mhm.
Liability issues. But you and Janice may run very similar companies and have different priorities and different levels of risk that you're able to tolerate. And so your agreements are going to reflect that. I have a client who I asked the other day, I was like, so what is your risk level that you're comfortable with? You know, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being I can't handle any risk. I want to button everything up. Risk makes me very nervous. Doesn't matter how small it is. It causes me heartburn. To a 10 of like, unless it's like really, really big, I don't care. You know, I look at everything as fixable in the future and I'll deal with any fines or penalties later if and when they come, and if and when an investor or lender cares. But until then, I don't care. And he's positive, like probably an 11 or 12. You know, and I have other clients who are like, I'm probably like a 3 or 4. Right. I don't have anybody that are 1. But people are like, I'm probably like a 3 or 4. I'm probably more risk averse. Now, I will say most entrepreneurs that are successful do go closer to the 10. They're closer to 7 or 8 because you just can't. I mean, you just got to be able to live with it and tolerate risk. You will never have a fully compliant company. No company is. And so being able to tolerate some risk is important. For me, one of the items that I advise people not to risk is misclassifying contractors instead of employees. People are by default employees, and just it doesn't really cost that much more to do it correctly, and it just saves you a pain. We did an analysis the other day that if you paid a subcontractor $50,000 a year for 3 years and they were determined to be an employee, it would likely cost you, I think it was almost $40,000. So is that really worth the risk? Now, are you going to get caught? Maybe, maybe not. But I'll tell you who blows that whistle. The person that believes they should have gotten the job. Somebody who doesn't like you. Right? Does that mean it's not the person you hired? There's so many other people that can report you for so many reasons. So why would you leave yourself open to such an easy picking?
Interesting.
But no, I don't vary the contract. I do vary the contracts based on industry or what we're doing, but we vary them the most based on what our clients are interested in from a risk perspective and what they want to cut out. If it is they're dead set on having a 1 or 2 page contract, then we figure out how to get them there.
Okay. All right. That's helpful. All right. I'm surprised this question isn't.
And your language, by the way, would be more casual. Your language would be much more casual than probably what Jillian needs for her contracts.
Right.
But you might decide, like, I don't really care. They can just sign it. I don't want to spend the money to make it casual. let's just keep it legalese. People expect it and they're fine with it, right? And so it kind of depends on who your clientele is.
Right.
So
Well-
for those of you that own a business, I would highly recommend that most people say, well, it's fine if it's just me. And be really brutally honest. It is really hard to make money if it is just you. It's almost impossible. I can't name one sole proprietor, sole member LLC that has no staff, doesn't leverage other resources, that can make a really nice living, like healthy 6 figures. It's almost impossible. You're going to burn yourself out. Consider hiring. Consider building towards scale. Figure out what systems are going to be in place to bring in somebody. I should not be hiring Jillian. I should be hiring Jillian's business, because Jillian knows how to run a business and deliver the services that I need. That's what I'm hiring. I'm not hiring Jillian. I'm hiring that I can trust that however Jillian's process is, her deliverables are the quality that I am looking for, and that whoever is on board with Jillian's company is going to give me what I am looking for. I'm going to hire Go Long. I like Jill, but I know I may not be working with Jill. I might see Jill on pre-recorded videos. I might be part of a membership program where I get access to Jill's pep talks, but I might work with Jane Doe or John Doe. And I'm going to get consistent, reliable service delivered in accordance with the values and the culture of Go Long. My contracts should reflect all of that. I should be able to substitute people for each one of you on this call for the actual delivery of products or services, for making those products, right? So think about how you're going to scale. How are you going to leverage other labor so that your labor goes down and you can focus on being a CEO? You can focus on growing that business. You can create more value. People don't buy solo practices of any size, of any type, really. They buy entities, they buy systems, they buy contracts, they buy name recognition, right? So how are you going to grow your business? And I would encourage everybody to think about that. And that needs to be reflected in the deals that you're making, whether it's with a client, a customer, a vendor, a subcontractor. There's appropriate times to have a sub. How are you going to grow this business and decrease your stress? It's not easy.
Words to live by: decrease your stress while
I
growing
know.
business. It's a goal. It's a goal to have. So I'm surprised this topic hasn't come up yet, but I'll throw it out there. So then there's legal stuff with your parents and legal stuff if you have a special needs child. So can you talk a little bit about like some of the stuff that you deal with relation to aging parents and some of the situations, like we as women over 40, but some of us still have parents that are living, how we could protect everybody involved?
Obviously, again, going back to power of attorney is absolutely critical, so you can make those medical decisions, having advance directive, having communication, ask them the hard questions. Really, really cannot encourage that more. Make sure that even people that don't have power of attorney, if you have siblings, know what your parents' wishes and expectations are, so it's not a fight. You don't need that in the middle of a crisis. Sometimes it's not possible. Sometimes there's family dynamics in place. But that open communication is really important. I would also recommend that you understand what their final wishes are for their body. Just so that it's one less thing that you don't have to wonder about. It's not always covered in the documents, but it is important. Regardless of your religion, it's probably, that's the last act, and it can cause a lot of stress. I highly recommend putting the will in place, ideally putting a trust of some sort in place, at least that takes effect upon death. But again, if it doesn't happen, then we can go through the court system. It is far easier if there is a will that is drawn up properly. Some states you can do what's called a holographic will, which is when you write on the back of a napkin and just get signed, and that will hold up. But they usually aren't very well drafted because they're on the back of a napkin. So, spend the money, get the wills done. Even if you don't have very many assets, it can be important. So there's still debts to take care of. There's still things to be done. Who's going to be in charge of that? In particular, if there's multiple siblings. So again, the open communication, it's really hard to have these conversations. Ask your parents where their current documents are located. If you don't know, you need to know. When was the last time you did it? Can you show them to me, or at least show me where they're stored? Are you going to be able to get in their house to get them, or are they in a safety deposit box that you can't access? The logistics are really important. What if your parents forget where they put it? What if they forget, as they're getting older, the last time that they executed a will or their power of attorney? And now you have two people who expected to have power of attorney, and now you're in a crisis situation and trying to figure out who's actually has the latest dated document, and somebody doesn't have their document, but they know that it's at mom and dad's place, right? So again, the logistics are just as important as the actual legal document. And then if they do need to, part of the reason why it's also important to go through an attorney is our documents, by default, we have provisions in there so that if you go on to government assistance, that it doesn't preclude that government assistance because of the asset test and income test. So those are baked into all of our default documents. The same goes for special needs. Now, I do not handle special needs families because there's so much that needs to go into place. There are attorneys that specialize in this, and I think that that's really important to be in touch with one of those attorneys. If you have a child with special needs, especially if you plan on supporting that adult child through end of life as much as possible, and then you're going to need someone to care for that child, putting in place guardianship rules that if the child really is not capable of making their own decisions, making sure that you have everything in place and properly documented for guardianship and conservatorship. You want to make sure that your child is protected. You're not going to always be here. And as hard as it is to have those conversations, have them with the proper professionals. You need to be speaking with your CPA, your financial advisor, your wealth manager, whoever you have on the money side. You need to have an attorney in place who specializes in special needs families. I cannot stress that enough. There are so many moving pieces, oftentimes associated with Social Security, and maybe if it was due to injury, you have all of these different protocols in place that you have to follow, and you can't mess it up. And they're an adult. So it's also making sure that you're actually able to execute these documents on their behalf to protect them. And what they may need to do if they are legally competent, having them go and execute a power of attorney, HIPAA releases, understanding what needs to happen so that you can assist. There are highly functioning special needs children out there that can live semi-independently. They are legally competent. So being able to understand where that line is and what documents need to be in place is really important.
So you talked a little bit about means testing.
Mm-hmm.
Can you go into a little bit more specifics on that? And because there's different things with look back periods in terms of qualifying for certain assistance. Maybe you can touch upon that a little bit.
So that's not my area of specialty, but I will say that there is a look back period. So what you do with your assets for a certain number of years going back, and it's different at the state and federal level, different types of assistance that you're receiving. So the most common issue is when people need access to medical health insurance. And so when they're looking at applying for Medicare or is it Medicaid? I always get them mixed up. So when you're applying at 65, or if you're on disability, how much your premiums are related to that income. And so it's making sure that, you don't want to drive up your premiums. And you also want to make sure that if you're on disability, that you're able to qualify for disability. You're not precluding yourself from these government benefits. And so being able to speak with somebody who specializes in the type of assistance that you're receiving for the state in which you are receiving it is really important, because there's a lot of benefits available. And as we get older, it probably doesn't apply to anybody on this call at this time, but it may apply to your parents. You're going to qualify for more things. And so it could even be triggering, your ability to access meals. Organizations, nonprofits that are set up to serve certain populations. And so if you want to be able to have your parents qualify, how are you going to be able to do that? Is and can be important, because it lessens the burden on the next generation for the financial care. And so if your parents do qualify, you want them to continue to qualify. You don't want to give them too much money. And some of those tests come down to, is somebody living with you, and are they caring for you, or are you a roommate? Are you paying for rent or room and board? Are they preparing your meals? Are you on your own? There's a lot of different tests involved depending, again, on that government assistance. And so making sure that you understand those rules is super duper important.
So if like a parent is living with you, depending on, it could vary if who has the deed to the house, will that also impact things?
It's more than the deed to the house. So it can be how somebody is being supported. Because if they're not paying rent, then that might make a difference.
Mm-hmm.
So, and again, like, this becomes incredibly complicated. You actually want, it's not even an attorney that typically does this. You want an advisor for Social Security, because that book, it's like that book.
Right.
There's a lot of rules. I know the big ones. I know some of the additional benefits available. But you really want to know what you're entitled to for your parents.
Miya, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. Appreciate it on both the personal and the professional fronts. It's your life, go the distance. And that means not just like in terms of your physical health, it's your mental health, your emotional health, your financial health, all the things, right? And having good protection, like some of the things that Miya talked about, is peace of mind, and that impacts your mental and physical and emotional health. So, and financial health.
And Jill, I want to add to that, we're talking about that holistic health. Your business needs to be holistically healthy too. So especially for women, we often have so many roles that we're trying to fulfill. We're caretakers. We have relationships of all types. If you have a special needs child in particular, you will be stretched more thinly. Consider that in your delivery schedule for your services or your products. Have you built in a margin so that you are not pushed to the hilt and stressed beyond belief, so that when something goes bump, you can respond to the bump and you can still fulfill your contractual obligations? And that's not something that most people think about or talk about. I do, because I believe that that's really important to acknowledge. We are not robots. We're not automatons, and there are other things going on in our lives. So whether you're solo or more, think about how you're going to make that business work for you, including in all of these contracts, so that you can make it, and you're giving yourself flexibility and grace to live life. And that's an important part of that go long philosophy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We'll end on that.
Thank you so much, everyone.